Yeah. Afghanistan. Now let's focus a little bit on Afghanistan because Afghanistan is extremely important as well. After, a policy of not engaging with the Taliban, we seem to have had non-official talks, with the Taliban as well. So Afghanistan is going to be important too.
Well, I think this was a year when the Afghan state, our ally, lost a lot of ground. And it is a matter of grave concern for us in India that, the Afghan National Army has not been able to hold on to territory, and there are governance issues there, and the Taliban is on the rampage, and there's also the ISIS factor, which is from time to time causing sensational attacks on civilians. The degree of violence and the loss of Afghan troops. Ashraf Ghani, the Afghan president, revealed that in the last 2.5 to 3 years, the official count, they lost 28,000 or more forces. So on average, just calculate the kill rate. It is tremendous, and I think the American withdrawal, Trump's, plan to withdraw and cut down American presence in Afghanistan, which came towards the end of the year, all these are warning signs for us. In a way, we have stuck to Iran and the Chabahar, which is important for stabilizing Afghanistan. We opened new routes, and there are all kinds of flights happening, wheat shipments happening between Afghanistan and India through Chabahar. We are doing a lot, but the pure developmental, diplomacy may not be sufficient in 2019 if the security situation worsens. And really, I think it will be a test for Modi administration as to how we can come up with a regional plan. We've been talking about the regional end game for a long time.
Right.
But now that the Americans are showing intent to isolate and to withdraw, more or less, I mean, if they are down to 7,000 troops, they cannot really shore up the Afghan state very much. So now we are talking about what can China, India, and Russia, RIC, which we recently met in G20, what can we do for Afghanistan? Pakistan remains the main problem there, but nonetheless, what can the rest of the three of us do? Because if we cannot ride piggyback anymore on an isolationist US to shore up the flagging Afghan state.
Right.
And as far as the peace process goes, we are aware, we have been also called on numerous occasions. Zalmay Khalilzad, the US peace envoy, has been also keeping us informed. But I would say that direct talks between Taliban and Americans are okay. But what we will want to ensure is that our interests and the long sacrifice, the treasure and the blood that we have invested in that country cannot be summarily removed and neglected. And therefore, we will need to fight for our interests there. At the same time, we have to keep the Afghan people's interests in the long term.
Absolutely,
and we want
right.
peace. We want peace. We want to be seen as not obstructing peace and saying that this is some kind of proxy war where influence is all that matters. But at the end of the day, Indian influence means peace in Afghanistan.
Right.
There
right.
is no contradiction between the two.
All right. Let's broaden the scope now even further, Ambassador, and look beyond Asia. Let's look at Europe, Africa, North and the Americas as well. What were the highlights for you there?
Well, in Europe, we find that Brexit has been going apace. There is some talk that there might be a second referendum. But at this moment, Prime Minister May is going for a hard choice. Which is not very popular with the British public, that is succumbing to the agreement which has been forced upon her by the European partners. Both European Union and the British are very much interested in the free trade area agreement with India, building up stronger ties with the world countries like China, India, and others. And therefore, that is the new situation which we will face in 2019. In Africa, we find that the Chinese have made deep inroads. They have given almost $300 billion worth of promised assistance. And in many areas, a lot of Chinese people have moved in. The Chinese have given support to many governments which are not very popular with their own people. And so there is a criticism. And therefore, there is a possibility that India might be once again requested to move more effectively in Africa. Because they have greater faith in the Indian technical abilities and the India's political kind of a participation in these countries.
Right.
As far as America is concerned, yes, US-India relations definitely are much better than ever before. There have been military exercises bilaterally, trilaterally, and there is this, India can take satisfaction that the Americans have been putting pressure on Pakistan to get rid of the uh, terrorists who have been spreading instability in all the neighboring countries. They have not given us complete satisfaction, but I must say that there is a much greater sympathy for the Indian position in the United States, and I think that we should be happy about that. The other Latin American countries and Canada, etc., there have been many visits to India. They have been trying to promote relations with India very strongly. But the point is that they have their own issues which are going on right now. Venezuela is unstable. Brazil also is facing a lot of difficulty. They are now getting a Trump type of a very pro-conservative, very conservative administration. So we have to keep in mind that the world is changing constantly, and India has to be flexible in 2019 to take care of its interests, but at the same time to make sure that our main area of action would be in Asia, to make sure that Asia remains peaceful, that our relationships which we are trying to develop with Japan on one hand, China on the other hand, they remain. Russia remains a friend, and we have been carrying on military exercises also with many of these countries. So I think this should continue.
All right. Mr. Nair, is there anything that you would have liked to have been done differently?
In 2018?
Yes.
Not really, I mean,
so everything was on track, you believe?
Well, there are things that could have been different, but we don't do things like that, I mean, for example, like Russia influenced the elections. I would have been very happy if India could influence the midterm elections, But number one, we don't do things like that. And secondly, I don't think we have the wherewithal to interfere in another country's elections. Well, not really. Everything was on well. But perhaps there is one thing I would say, which is more to do with the media rather than the government itself. You see, the media, I'm not talking of our channel, I'm talking of the private media in particular, television, goes on and on about terrorism, Throughout the year, you switch on any channel, anchors on foreign policy talk about terrorism, you see. Yes, there is a terrorist threat to India, but the fact is that in 2018 there's hardly been any terrorist activity incidents in India except Kashmir, you see. So while the threat of terrorism is there, some anchors, some journalists are making a career out of terrorism, you see. I was with a minister, a union minister the other day, and he was telling one of these anchors who makes too much of terrorism, look, you should highlight the fact that after Pathankot, there have virtually been no terrorist attacks against India, barring Kashmir, which is an old problem. So you should highlight the fact, instead of going on about terrorism, you should highlight the fact that India has contained terrorism, you see. And this minister was telling this anchor, look, you should also take into account the fact that nobody wants to invest in a country where there is terrorist activity, you see. So we are trying to invite investment. Warren Buffett and George Soros and people like that wouldn't want to invest in a country where there is terrorism.
Right.
So I would very much like in 2019 that these media people who have made a career out of talking about terrorism should turn down their bombast and instead concentrate on our successes in containing terrorism rather than talking about terrorism bogey, because we also need that in order to attract investment.
Right.
We have to show that there is no terrorism in India, that India is a peaceful place to invest.
Right.
That is what I would like to see in 2019.
Right. All right. Professor, what were the key factors that were limiting and also driving India's foreign policy in 2018?
I think one of the factors, Frank, is the foreign economic, diplomacy, and that, I think has really picked up pace. And I think that's one of the reasons we should be satisfied with the Modi government's performance this year, because you see the inward FDI has been $61 billion or more. It's a record and continues to be that way for the last 4 years. And every year, year on year, it's been an improvement. And secondly, our ease of doing business ranking of the World Bank has also again shot up by a large number of places. So if you take these two together, the message that of stability and security and that India is a good place where you can get return on investment has spread. And Prime Minister continues to indefatigably, go around the world and continue to woo and quote foreign investors in a big way. And I think that yields all these, outcomes. Because end of the day, it is not a flash in the pan. We are not talking about only year one of Modi administration when this was going great. For 4 years, he has sustained it. Now, 5th year also, we are doing this. So I think it shows that on foreign economic diplomacy, especially with global CEOs, with sovereign wealth funds, all the wooing has worked. And now we are yielding benefiting from the yields of that. And you will see that in 2019, growth projections for India, economic growth, are high. It's not only because of domestic reasons. It's because the international community, especially the global holders of capital, are showing great level of confidence in India.
Right.
And I think when we go into 2019, we can say with our heads held high that, we have consistently shown that India is left behind a kind of a laggard kind of a image and is now leaping. And so there may be some questions about Make in India and domestic, labor regulations and those kind of things. But overall, if you see, the image we have projected has been positive and has been believed by the bulk of the international community consistently for 4.5 years.
Right.
And going into 5 years. And I think foreign economic diplomacy is one area we often neglect in assessing Modi administration. That is where he gets an A+.
All right. Very quick closing comments from all my guests on, what to expect in the new year. Ambassador?
Well, in 2019, while the concentration of the Modi government would be on the elections in the country, so I think whatever we have achieved so far, we should continue to maintain those relationships with these countries. If there are any dialogues which are required at bilateral or the trilateral level, they should be continued.
Right.
So that the diplomats and the other officials, they should continue doing their work while the Prime Minister may be busy with the election rhetoric within the country.
All right. Mr. Nair?
Our only major partner, which is on the cusp of change, is the United States. Bangladesh, there is an election, but I expect Hasina to come back. So, but the United States is on the cusp of a change. The new Congress is coming in January. And we need to invest more on Capitol Hill, I mean, we already have a strong influence on Capitol Hill, but we need to do more because Trump is no longer reliable. Who knows, Trump may not even be president at the end of by the end of 2019. So Congress is our bulwark for promoting our interests. We need to concentrate a lot more on Capitol Hill in 2019.
Professor, close the show for us.
So while I said that we had readjusted to the Trump reality and had worked it out with the Chinese, I still believe that China remains the predominant source of insecurity for India geopolitically, and the Indo-Pacific is where a lot of work needs to be done in terms of formations, small group coalitions. It's not only with the Japan, which of course is central to us, but also with ASEAN countries, specific ASEAN countries like Indonesia, Vietnam. We need to do a lot more, I think, to feel like we have warded off this shadow that is looming over our strategic space. We have to preserve our supremacy in the Indian Ocean and also maintain our relations in a manner where our influence is not going to be frittered away. So I think that's a long-term challenge for 2019. Throughout the year, we will face this constant issue of how do we manage the spreading Chinese influence and how do we work it out with smaller partners in a way which is not seen as intruding on their sovereignty, but at the same time protecting our interests. It's a thin, it's a narrow tightrope act.
All right. On that note, then we'll call it a wrap on this edition of India's World.